To help discern the complexities of contact in a world of conflicting motives, shifting power dynamics, and new science, this is Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Key TV in Northern California. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. It's no joke to stake the hard-won and richly deserved reputation of a sterling scientific career on pushing the exploration and development of a long-derided and professionally radioactive topic. These are the kinds of heresies that in another century could have ended with spark and kindling. And judging from the reaction of some science pundits, those brash and barking bishops in the Church of Dogma, these so-called crimes are equivalent. Yet because of the continued and courageous work of some bright and adventurous minds, the stigma has lessened somewhat, and the vanguard of this potentially transformative rejiggering of the scientific mainstream beckons many of the best and brightest minds alive. Our guest tonight, Dr. Garry Nolan, is a trailblazer in this long-running fight for intellectual freedom, sound science, and curiosity. Through his own work and that of the Soul Foundation, a nonprofit partnership between Nolan, Peter Skafish, David Grush, Leslie Kean, and others, Nolan has pushed the frontier forward and stands now on the precipice of what may be revolutionary discoveries, in part through his work with Jake Barber Skywatcher and their seemingly fantastical effort to contact and eventually bring in for a landing unidentified anomalous phenomena. These are exciting times to be alive, and challenging. With so many, though, of society's open wounds now gaping, morally, politically, economically, how do we prioritize and protect these new developments without further damaging the social contract? And what does this emerging science say about the nature of humanity and our place in this universe? Finally, if answers to that last question may be in the offing, who can we trust to midwife that message, to communicate these profound lessons to all of us without advantaging all the daunting powers that may seek to exploit, commercialize, or control such news? Big questions require big answers. Garry Nolan is our guest. Thanks for joining us, Garry.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Let's start with, obviously you're a huge name in the field, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your important career and your work to meet with me. But let's start with, just a basic description of how you would describe or pitch the Soul Foundation. What is the mission of what you guys are trying to do?
Well, the first mission really is to provide a language, a lexicon of how to talk about this matter in a professional manner. And secondarily, then in a scientific manner. Professional means let's keep the hype and the accusations out of the discussion. Professional means let's treat each other with as much respect as is expected, let's say at Christmas dinner. Well, some Christmas dinners can go a little off the rails.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Been at some of those. But it's family is the idea. But from a scientific standpoint, it's to provide a framework for how it is that we make definitions or assign definitions about what it is that we're talking about. Because in any scientific conversation, if you don't have definitions, you can just basically circle the drain continuously and never really know what it is that you're talking about. And so part of that is, let's create the definitions. Second, when we feel like we have, if not conclusions, if we have tentative outlines of what it is that we want to talk about, or we've studied an area, you publish these papers in a way that's peer reviewed so that other people can reference them. This is an important concept that I think that a lot of people don't necessarily fully appreciate in how science or any academics is done. Because you can reference a conclusion from a paper, or you can reference data from a paper, it means you don't have to repeat all of it in your conversation. You can say, this has been done, here it is, here's where you can go and look at it if you want further definition of what it is that I've just stated. And so you build from that with these bricks of knowledge, a foundation towards some continuing and often distant goal. And then the other part of it is to understand that in science, you make mistakes every day. In fact, you're expected to correct whatever it is that you said today, tomorrow, with new data. And so just frankly, getting that essence across to the public in a way that people feel like, okay, if I'm going to contribute towards the Sol Foundation, either in work or in money or resources, I'm contributing towards people who are doing this for me because I believe in the merit of the individuals who are involved. So, we've taken upon ourselves to go in three at least different areas. One is policy and providing frameworks for how the government might discuss the matter. So we talk a lot and work a lot with government officials, not behind the scenes or secretly, but just to say, hey, here's a white paper on this matter, USOs. Here's a white paper on satellite observations. All right, here's a white paper on how the United Kingdom has been working on these matters. Here's a white paper on experiencers. It's Do any of these change the nature of the conversation? No, but they are now foundational information that's in the literature that somebody else can reference.
Mm.
And so that's the first part. So then that's one direction. Another direction is, my interest in materials research. Now, materials research is expensive, and people think that it can just be done instantly. No, it's like $500,000 to $1 million, and that's even to do with things and studies with materials that are currently out there that I frankly don't think are even technology per se. Although I do think though that we do have some more recent results with the bismuth magnesium that get me even more interested in it. I'm actually going to be talking with some of my graduate students this afternoon, graduate students with whom I work. They're not my graduate students. And that just, they're intriguing. There's definitely apparently a structure there to that material. It's not just some slag that fell off the back of a truck.
Does it
So
hint at manufacturing? I mean, just real quick.
definitely manufactured. It's clearly manufactured. Who manufactured it and whether it's anything exotic yet to be determined. I mean, there's a lot of prosaic reasons why even Earth manufacture could give us what it is that we're seeing, but I just want to double check it. And again, it's like we did with the Atacama skeleton, what I did with the so-called Star Child skull, both with a very hyperbolic claims around their origin. I entered them hoping that I could have proven in the positive sense those hyperbolic claims, but they were not. And so
Yeah.
take them off the table. They're prosaic. Um, so there's that effort. And then a third effort, main effort in the Sol Foundation is an artificial intelligence summary of as much data as we can get our hands on through a large language model. And this is being spearheaded by Jonathan Berta, who's on our board, who's the CEO of a large artificial intelligence company for medical imaging. Uh, uh, he's made his own LLM around just this. And again, that's something which we will provide then to the community at large for free so that people can have a standard place they can come and ask a question that is hopefully unbiased, but is trained on the corpus of knowledge that is already available in the literature. Because, I mean, for instance, I'm often asked, where's the evidence? What's the evidence? Well, there's lots of evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much evidence as to be almost incontrovertible, but there's nothing that I can hand to another scientist yet and says, here is the object of your desire. Here's the alien body. Here's the anti-gravity unit that you can attach and strap to your back and go float off, across the landscape. That doesn't yet exist. So
Quick follow-up on that large language model. Is that something that potentially people in the public or researchers would be able to
Oh,
access?
yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
Like it
I
will
think
be a
actually, I mean, we've made it available to beta testers already.
okay,
And so, yeah, it's going to be available to everybody. We hope to make it for free.
fantastic.
And that's one of the reasons, for instance, why the Sol Foundation, we set up a tiered access model for people to pay. been some controversy online about,
Yeah.
oh, well, you're making people pay for it. Well, someone's got to pay for it, and if there's people out there and people have given, up to 100,000 to $500,000 to the Soul Foundation, it's not going to pay pay my salary for anything. And
Yeah.
I donated more than enough money to the Soul Foundation, and then see no expect have no expectation of seeing a return on that.
No one's
Um,
getting rich off of
no one's
this.
getting rich,
Yeah, yeah.
and so no one's getting rich, believe me. Um, and so having people being able to donate through these tiered accesses is actually providing benefit to the community at large. And so, people who are going to give large amounts of money want to know that it's going to something good, and that good is public benefit.
Yeah.
So, to all the people who think that donating goes nowhere, it goes a lot of places, even if you don't think that academics is going to give you, a handshake from an alien tomorrow.
Well, that speaks to some people's like complaint about like at the Soul Foundation, there's a lot of people in suits who are obviously there and come from industry and are venture capitalists and that sort of thing. And there seems to be almost an allergic reaction from some seeing those people, like confronting that business, the capitalist part of it. But can you speak to how necessary it is to engage those folks in your work in order to keep the ball rolling or rolling at all, right? I mean,
Well, I mean, look, I am an unapologetic capitalist, but at my heart, I'm a socialist. I would want there to be a world where, the capitalist incentive isn't necessarily required to benefit all. I mean, that's what society is supposed to do at one level. But, we have to work with what we've got, and what we've got is a human psyche that still requires incentive to motivate them to do extra work. And so I'm totally unapologetic about that. But seeing people in business suits should be a positive thing. Seeing military or government officials at these should be a positive thing if they're sitting there in the open. I mean, they're not afraid, so why should you be afraid of them? And rather than distrusting or mistrusting their motives, why not work with them to find out what it is that they're trying to do for you?
yeah.
I mean, look, I work in cancer and immunology, and I spent my whole life developing technologies. I mean, if you've had a retroviral gene therapy, you can thank me, right? Because
Yeah.
and a couple of my colleagues who we developed the retroviral gene system based on the 293 T cells. If you've heard about a CRISPR experiment in human cells, that's because of me and the 293 T cell retroviral and lentiviral systems that 293T enabled. Um, and yeah, Stanford licenses it. And yeah, Stanford gets money for it. But someone's going to have to pay for it. I mean, if the government is going to cut back on what it is that they're paying for medical research, then there's got to, I mean, the money's got to come from somewhere. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
you can just forget any further advances in cancer.
Yeah.
So, and the same thing goes for basically efforts in this area. If we want to understand what this phenomenon is, we're probably going to have to incentivize people with a lot more money than they know what to do with to put money into it to study it. Because I mean, just think about it. If there is an opportunity here from a technology standpoint to advance human capabilities, I mean, and someone is willing to put money down to study it, and then they're going to, let's say, benefit from some royalties on it, but their benefit is minor compared to what society at large can garner. I mean, why not? It's
Yeah.
a, people waste far more money in Las Vegas than they do on this kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've just been reading Whitley Strieber's The Fourth Mind. And in one of the early chapters of that book, he talks about, how we get to disclosure. First off, he says that he doesn't think that the private industry or the government has necessarily done anything all that wrong with what's gone on up until now, that they've kind of been forced by the phenomenon to play this sort of defensive informational position. And that now, as we move forward, it's going to be necessary to incentivize um, disclosure or drawing them out rather
Hmm.
than making it seem, penalizing or that we're ready to pounce legally. We need to give them a reason to want to come forward and make it worth their while if we want to have any hope of them taking that risk because they're putting themselves out there by releasing that information.
Yeah, I mean, I have long advocated for a period of forgiveness for people in the government or in industry uh, who might or might not have been, holding back information. I mean, I always say this myself, is I make decisions based on the information available to me at the time, or the strictures that were placed on me at the time. And I'm never going to regret what it is that I did previously based on what I felt were ethical decisions made at that time. Now, I might learn from them. I might say I'm not going to do it again based on the outcomes, but I'm not going to regret it because regret is a never-ending black hole. So I think that we do need to move in that direction. But then simultaneously, and I'm well, quoted on this, is don't expect somebody else to do it for you. Don't expect somebody to hand it to you on a silver platter. Because if you're going to complain about that, I mean, on Twitter at me, I'm just going to block you, first of all. And, if all you're going to do is complain and not do or not contribute, if not money, your time and your effort, then, frankly, you're of no use to me. And I think you're of no use to the movement at large. That's the first thing. So, and this comes, circles around to, my efforts to get a hold of materials and do the best analysis that I can. It circles back to what Skywatcher is doing, and what they're publicly stated that they're going to be doing. And so, people say, okay, well, where's the evidence? Then the evidence is what places and groups like Skywatcher are doing. I think Skywatcher is well ahead of the curve in what they're doing publicly, and they've been as open as they reasonably can be about their motivations and what they're trying to do. And they're building off of uh, other groups that have done similar things. I mean, CE5, amongst others, there's plenty of other groups out there that claim to be able to make some kind of interactive contact. But we're trying to go a step further, right? We're trying to see if there's a way that a two-way communication might be enabled and collect the data. I mean, there's plenty of people who sit out in the desert and do stargazing and calling of things. But unless you have the kinds of secondary data collection that is scientifically validatable and is then something that you can put into a research paper,
Yeah.
you're just having fun on the weekend.
Yeah.
But again, it's two things. It's you can do something and be convinced of the observation yourself, and you need nobody else on the outside to tell you what it is that you saw, right? So you don't need science to know what it is that you saw if you're absolutely convinced about what it is. You might have misinterpreted it, but you don't need anybody else to tell you
Yeah.
necessarily. But if I want to convince a colleague of mine in science, I have to do it the way that Skywatcher is approaching it.
Mhm. On that front, how would you describe the work that you're doing with Skywatcher? As I understand it, there's technology that you've brought to bear. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but can you describe if that's possible or if there's no
Yeah, I'm
embargo on that
I'm
information?
sort of limited. I mean, the we have a single point of contact that should be the sort of let's say the messenger of what Skywatcher is doing, and I'm not that. I'm talking as elliptically as I reasonably can. My main role is to provide the scientific input and then how it is that you set up an experiment, how it is that you analyze the data, who do we need to go to,
Yeah.
so for instance, if we have certain kinds of data and we require, let's say somebody in academics to help us analyze the data, then I'm the person who would be the one reaching out and providing the validation of a Stanford professor. But that doesn't mean that there aren't already people within Skywatcher that don't have reach out into the military contractor arena, who are, in many cases, better equipped than academics to help us analyze the data, because a lot of the instruments that we're going to be using are the kinds of things that are high-end data collection service approaches, so that that these individuals are accustomed to working with. So it's not all about academics, but it is about doing it in a validatable way
Yeah.
that is as open source as we can reasonably make it.
Yeah, and if we want to change the conversation and then bring in these folks who, the brain trust of every college in America and open up the doors to the subject, we have to come forward with solid, scientific,
Mhm.
sound
Yeah.
information, and that's it sounds like what you're
Well, I
trying
mean,
to do
every
with it.
time I see a comment saying, "Where's the data?" or "Where's the evidence?" or, "Show me the data," well, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So, I feel as much the frustration of the public as they do, because, I'm trying to do it in a way that I can now have a conversation with my fellow scientists. So, it's not trust me, bro. I'm not a trust me, bro kind of guy.
It's wait
I'm
and
like,
see, which I mean, I don't know what else you can ask for in this moment, right? I
yeah,
mean,
it's like, look, yeah, I'm trying. So, and a lot of people are trying. So support the try. Don't denigrate the try.
yeah.
But
Well,
people
there's a
are what they are. I mean,
e-
they
exactly.
think they're having fun when they make all these comments or whatever, and it just, while there's a nub of me, I'm still human. It bothers me. In the bigger picture, I'm like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Just move on.
Well, it's so predictable at a certain point that I mean, and it's too conspiratorial to be true, but half the time I'm like, oh, they're on some payroll or
Hmm.
they're
Yeah.
trying to achieve some objective with this argument because it comes up so reflexively, so knee jerk.
Hmm.
Almost every time anybody's come out with something that I'm just
Yeah.
like, you're either not that interested in the topic and you're not that concerned about what people are trying to find out, or you're getting
Or
paid.
you're using it to vent some inner anger or inner insecurity. That's
Yeah.
probably the best way to put it. Sorry to say. I mean, I just don't.
Yeah. Well, that's America right now. So.
Hmm. Hmm.
Speaking of America right now, one of the things that I've noticed over the past several months, since Donald Trump's election, is that there has been a kind of bifurcation in the topic where there are people who, because Trump got elected, suddenly they have turned, um, I don't want to say leftward, but they've turned to way more skeptical of what government may or may not come up with in the near future. And a lot of them are arguing that even if some kind of disclosure does happen through government, with Trump in office and people like Elon Musk in his periphery, they're worried that whatever is discovered, comes out, or whatever will get captured by sort of the new emerging oligarch class, which
Hmm.
I have to say I do see emerging. Are you concerned about that? And how can we prevent, given that we need funding to do the science and we need people with money to provide the infrastructure and the backing for us to move forward on so much of this, how do we keep it from just further padding the nest of people who are already billionaires and exacerbating inequity? I mean, if this stuff is that transformative, it's like AI. If billionaires develop AI and then own the AI and then they, deploy the AI and control access for everybody else, we all become that much more subservient. And I think people are worried that it may trend in that direction. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, let's use AI as the example of, I think, frankly, it's interesting what we're seeing out of China with DeepSeek and the new Manus agentic AI that just came out last week, or earlier this week.
I haven't heard
They have
about it.
adopted the open source model. I mean, they're providing their models for free. You can download it. And they're basically saying power to the people. And yet on the other hand, you've got, the AIs of, let's say, Google or Facebook they're providing them open source. I don't know if you can download, yeah, I guess you can. You can download OpenAI, some of the mini versions. I'm not sure about Anthropic's AI. And so, yeah, I mean, people are going to make money, and rich people are going to make money. And and until we retool human psyche, we're not going to get rid of that. I think the pendulum has swung a little far on the other side, and maybe it's going to require a near economic collapse to reset the thing. But it's way above my pay grade to comment on that. But I think the open source model of data is really critical. When I was a graduate student in Lenin Lee Herzenberg's lab, these were two of my professors at Stanford, and they had the two biggest patents at Stanford by far. The other guy was Stanley Cohen, and our Department of Genetics, had like by far the biggest war chest from patents, and yet the Herzenbergs especially gave most of their money away. I learned from them and watching Stanley Cohen how it is, and I worked with actually his patent attorney for my first patents. I learned how to patent and how to do things. But one of the things that Len Herzenberg was absolutely, Len and Lee were both absolutely meticulous about was you do not keep information to yourself. So they made antibodies. So all the therapeutic antibodies that are injected into people were basically the patents were owned by Stanford. But Len's mantra was if you made a reagent and somebody asked you for a copy of it and it didn't cost you anything to give it to them, you gave it to them. So the retrovirus stuff that I mentioned earlier, I could have charged a fortune for the cell lines that I made for delivering retroviruses. Based on Len, I had one of the first laboratory websites in the world. I put a simple material transfer agreement up and said, you can use this for whatever you want, as long as it's non-commercial and you're not using it in humans. And just send me a FedEx number and I'll ship it to you. And I shipped out literally probably tens of thousands of those to everybody. And what happened? My cell lines for retroviral delivery became the standard because I made it free for everybody, and then other people innovated upon it.
Yeah.
And so I took what Len taught me in that open source model and took it to a next level. There was a guy at Stanford. He came into the biochemistry department. His name is Patrick Brown. He was a professor there, and he pushed the open source academic model of paper publication. Say paper should be free. We shouldn't have to basically pay for papers that to read the research of something the government has already paid for.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, Patrick is now the CEO of I think it's the one of those plant-based meat uh, company, the biggest one. I forget the name of them, but
Yeah.
he left Stanford to go start that because he believed in the value of not using resources that we shouldn't use, or at least taking advantage of things and not, I I I happen to like meat, but that's only because I was brought up on it. But I think that Patrick's, he kept to his values. Dr. Brown is
Mm-hmm.
his name, Patrick Brown. So, I think if we take that model and then we use that same model for the kinds of things that might come out of, um, let's say UAP or UAP materials, uh, that's a good thing. I mean, I've been pushing this public-private partnership notion that if something is discovered from it, you can set up something which is commercial, but you should set up some sort of public beneficiary opportunity where if money comes from it, it gets reinvested back into society and not just going into somebody's pocket. That's just
Yeah.
me. I mean, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. It just means that that's the model that I would prefer.
Yeah.
Uh, Somebody else might have a different model. But what I do know, though, is if you don't patent something, you are risking it not getting developed properly.
And why? I mean, as someone who's ignorant of that kind of thing.
Because what happens is if you because the only so for instance, I came up with a technology way back in the day using retroviruses to reverse the flow of evolution, to make cells better.
Hmm?
Could I basically make 10 million different retroviruses, each of which subtly alters the cell that it's in, so that the cell gets better rather than worse? And then using what the retrovirus did as a tag to find what it is that it did, and then making a drug that replicated the retrovirus's effect. So I reversed the flow of evolution. It was a $500 million company. We sold several $100 million worth of targets with that. But the information then became public. But nobody would have put the money into it if I just published it on a library shelf.
Yeah,
Because it took about $100 million to develop it into a commercial tool.
yeah. And so, in order for that investment to be, safe or developable, it needs kind
Somebody
of a,
felt they needed to make money on it.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
because the NIH is not set up, nor is it appropriate for the NIH to basically make commercial products. The NIH is meant to do the kind of basic research. And 95% of the things that are discovered in academics will have no necessarily obvious commercial value, but they have value in that they fill out the reservoir of information from which you draw to create a tight commercial product that helps humanity. People think that all research should be focused on something, which I would love it if that were the case, but we don't know ahead of time what discovery is going to come
Right.
from
Yeah.
just looking around in the garbage. Almost all the discoveries I've ever made have come out of an unexpected outcome from just raw data collection. So that's called basic research.
Yeah.
And so either of those two extremes, pure basic research versus pure translational, are wrong. But you do pour, pure basic to find the translational opportunities. And by making the data public, you then leave it to to students or academics at large to say, aha, I can put this together with that. That becomes a novel idea that's patentable, and that's something that I can turn into something if somebody's willing to put the money into it to help me develop it. And
Which is exactly the system that you're trying to get the UAP topic into. It's
yes,
like by doing all the scientific, bona fides and getting it embraced into that kind of culture, then it becomes a self-fulfilling project, right, over
right,
time, and that's
right.
what you want. Yeah.
And that's what happened with it. I mean, nobody expected the large language models 5 years ago to be what they are today. And yet, just the basic research in math and how to encode information led to this extraordinary development of the large language models. And God knows what's coming around the bend with other, just pure math or pure material science. I mean, my goal with the material science that I'd like to be able to do is not because even if somebody handed me an anti-gravity generator that I'd figured out how it would work. No, I'm interested in just the metal that it was made from. How did they put it together? Is it different? What can I learn? So, I mean, my whole life has been, and frankly, most biologists, we're reverse engineering biology because we have this remarkable instrument of biology, and it is at least as far as we know, the most complicated machine in existence. And we don't know how it works. We don't
Yeah.
know the principles of the chemistry at the lowest levels. We don't know how 10,000 genes make somebody as complicated as any of us. how did you ever encode the information into the DNA that is only 3 billion bases long, and yet it can make something which is hundreds of quadrillions of bits of information, as with a purpose and an instinct and memory and the ability to live in an environment. Um, how is that information encoded? So learning those principles allows you, and reverse engineering human biology is the same thing that we should be doing with these alleged craft.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that through that basic research of whatever the materials are and that kind of thing, eventually maybe we get to an understanding of how the technology works or anything that may baffle us about its
Right.
performance. I mean, but it's a step-by-step building process, right? I mean,
I don't expect, and it's, if you could have taught somebody in the 1600s how to make the Gorilla Glass on your Apple iPhone,
mm,
right? The recipe for making, that strong glass, what
yeah,
might have that changed in human history? If you could have made a stronger metal, maybe the knights running around in suits of armor might have been stronger or better able to not die.
yeah,
I mean, you name it. I mean, those little discoveries, um, and the recipes for how to make these materials, and their capabilities are really what, I'm just looking to provide that basic information so that other people can run with it.
yeah. It's like Jared Diamond's book, Diamonds and Steel or whatever it is.
Hmm.
But it's basically about that. And the advantage in history often goes to the person who makes the slight upgrade in the materials that allows them to suddenly dominate a continent because they have
Right,
stirrups or they
right.
have, a smelting technique that,
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
superior. Yeah, and those things are, I mean, important
You
and
know,
fascinating.
the discovery that legumes, when planted in a field, rejuvenate the fertilization and the nitrates in that, people recognized what it is that it did. It took, until like the 1960s, 1970s to realize that legumes provide homes for basically a kind of bacteria, rhizobium, that actually fixes nitrogen from the air, and turns it into fertilizer. But they'd recognized the phenomenon earlier, but we understood the process only in the last, let's say 50 to 60 years. In fact, when I was a undergrad at Cornell, I worked in the laboratory of a man who actually was deeply involved in the study of that process. I always found rhizobium fascinating.
That brings me to consciousness, strangely. One of the things that I have talked a lot about on my show is sort of human capacity and
Mhm.
the limits thereof, or what we may be discovering about what is consciousness and how it can be used in ways that we have not been using it, or maybe historically did and have forgotten. But a lot of like when you talk about psi research, people say, well, if you don't have the mechanism explained for what makes psi possible, it's never really going to be accepted by mainstream science. Sort of like what you're saying with that Lejeune thing. Um, I'm wondering, what is your view? I mean, to start broad with this discussion, what is your view of consciousness? Would you consider yourself, I mean, is it an epiphenomenon of the brain and that's it? Do you have any thoughts on what the nature of, that human beingness is in that regard?
I think it's just, I think it's just organized space-time. Um, I think if you put matter together in the right way, at the right level of complexity, that you can achieve consciousness. Now, whether you believe in the Stewart Hameroff, Penrose, Orcoar, orchestrated reduction, and that microtubules are the sort of the engine of consciousness or not, or whether you believe it's material aspect of interneuronal processes, is irrelevant to me. The fact of the matter is, if you organize a brain in just the right way with the right constituents, you get something which can think the color blue, even though blue has no real material, you know, factor in the universe is the qualia, as they say, of what consciousness can be. The whole I see, therefore, or I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Um, the fascinating thing is that physicists have come full circle. The scientists who would be the least likely to think that consciousness is anything, um, magical or higher order are the ones that are the now will be the ones that tell you that nothing happens until somebody looks at it. Nothing happens until it's observed. Observed by who? Observed by something, right? And so therefore observed by a consciousness. So, they're the ones now who are pushing the narrative that consciousness is at the root of everything.
Quantum observer
Quantum,
effect or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it means that, right down at the root of how the universe operates, right down with the quarks, the gluons, the wave functions, whatever it is that reality is, requires consciousness to operate. So, it's unless we're missing something, that's the conclusion that you have to come to. I mean, I feel fully comfortable saying that my dogs are conscious. My husband is like, no, they're not. No, they're not. They're not special. I said, no, yes, they are. They're conscious. They're little people. They just don't think the same way that we do, but they are, you know, uh, I mean, a mouse is conscious as far as I'm concerned, and they are accorded just as much reasonable respect as anybody else. That's
It's
just me.
interesting. I totally agree with you. And you were talking about complexity of living things earlier, and I think that there's a confluence between that complexity and the ability of the universe to sort of open its eyes, which I think is what's
Yeah.
happening with every, at least animal being, and probably every plant in
Hmm.
some form or another. But it's an awareness of the universe sort of coming alive and looking around at itself. And
Yeah.
maybe people are deluded into thinking they're siloed, but I think that there's some way in that they're fundamentally connected.
Hold a second. I'm going to find something and I'll show it to you. So, to this point, was a physicist, Burkhard Heim, and here's the here's the book, and you can download this PDF, I think, online.
Okay.
Um, but he has a math, and I'm certainly not qualified to discuss what the math means. But as with many individuals who have these theories of how reality is put together, um, you have people who are supporters and detractors of it, and I probably know of about 10 or so different physicists with wildly different ideas about how the universe is put together mathematically. But what is unique about Burckhardt's work, he calls it holomorphisms of living structures. And this is basically, and again, you can go back and look at the book itself, but these are mathematical constructs where, as you make more and more complicated objects, and in this case, he's talking about the brains of humans, the complexity reaches into higher dimensions that allows for, as he puts it, an object to be formed in this higher dimension that is independent of the support structure that created it in the first place.
Wow, that's
Okay.
cool.
And so what he's saying is that the soul
Yeah.
is capable of being created by these higher ordered structures. And once created, it can be independent of the body that created it in the first place. So post-mortem consciousness is basically what he's saying. Now, I have no idea whether it's real or not.
Yeah, but I
I
mean,
find
what
it
a thought.
fascinating
Yeah, exactly.
that the idea has a root in a mathematical proof to the extent that math is provable at any level. And that, he was pushing that idea. Um, Now, what's interesting about his math is that the constants of the universe that it predicts are actually more accurate to further decimal points than many of the other models that are out there. So there's an element of truth to what it is that he's saying. But one of the things I've learned from, being around a place like Stanford, and when I was also at MIT, is that if you get a geometrician and an algebraicist in the same room together, and ask them to explain reality, fisticuffs are soon to be,
Sounds like
ensue.
the start of a dirty joke. I mean,
It's just that, that they have a view of the world, of how it's put together, with their assumptions about what is the most likely way that the universe is. In some ways, mathematicians are even more ardent uh, cultists than are religions,
yeah,
in terms of how they think about the world. And so I don't think an external proof or a better math is available yet to say which one of the many is right.
yeah,
But the fact, though, that there are such theories out there that explain consciousness, a la Penrose, or independent consciousness, a la Burkhard Heim, tells me that we still have a lot more to do in terms of explaining what it is that mathematically consciousness is. And so, I think it's exciting, personally.
yeah. No, I do too, and I think that that's what's. I mean, for me, talking to a lot of folks about this, and you talk to materialists, and they're like, "Well, we figured out so many things, and there's this assumption that we figured out that consciousness is just imprisoned within the brain, and that's all it is." And we haven't proven that, and we've decided lots of times that we've figured the world out, only to be
Mm.
disabused of that notion shortly
Right,
thereafter. I mean,
right,
quantum physics is exactly that kind of phenomenon. So it's almost as if we need to always be ready to view our knowledge up to that point as conditional upon further discoveries. And but we don't want to do that. And maybe it's because of tenure and position and whatever else. People get entrenched in their authoritative spots and don't want to move over for new and fresh ideas. But yeah, just basically that notion that we've always thought we've had things figured out, and that you know uh, inertia of having
right,
decided that the universe is explainable at all, really. I
right.
mean, ultimately, I mean, that's almost kind of a fool's errand. But
Well, I mean, I think there's two things in that. One, because you asked originally what got us off on this is, what is consciousness, and is humanity the only thing that can be conscious? And so my answer was, we're just organized space-time, and there's probably many other ways that you can organize space-time to achieve consciousness. And, maybe some of these plasmas that people see are a form of consciousness that have, that have been, organized by a Burkhard Heim-like process, and now are independent and still yet live in our reality, and are not necessarily souls per se. And so, no, do I think AI will become conscious? No, I think it can mimic consciousness, but I do think that there's probably a way you can organize metals or other materials than organics to achieve something that is conscious as well. Maybe, at the, somewhere down near the, the surface of Jupiter, the pressure of the atmosphere there could create metallic hydrogen containing materials that, by themselves, are conscious.
yeah,
They don't look anything like what we think of as consciousness, but they're capable of thought and processing. So I just think, if we limit things to just what is our definition of human, we're really missing an opportunity. And so, looking then at the materials from UAP, uh, alleged UAP, to be fair, um, is missing an opportunity to understand how somebody else might have realized how matter could be organized and used in ways that we haven't yet appreciated. Because there's two things. One is learning the lesson of what they did, and then later, uh, figuring out what it is that it does. And then third, figuring out how we can replicate it.
Thank you for all of that. One of the things that I've observed and I think is interesting, and it's happened to me as well, is that the studying of the UAP topic led me into all kinds of philosophic directions, right? Like I started reading all kinds of things that led to the next thing and the next thing, and pretty soon you end up in, non-dual Eastern traditions about
Hmm.
consciousness and doing inner work and that sort of thing. Um, as a brain scientist, I mean, do you think that there is any connection between people who are experiencers and people who try to self-develop in terms of meditation or non-dual traditions? Is there a confluence there, or are experiencers just experiencers, and there are some people who kind of brush up against spiritual awakenings, but the two aren't necessarily related?
I think they're related. I mean, it is, I mean, it's pretty clear that people who meditate or people who use hallucinogenics, such as the you know the tryptamine class of drugs like DMT, psilocybin, um, LSD. It's just interestingly, it's the same basic molecule, fascinatingly, but it binds to these receptors that cause these effects. Um, they claim to experience entities that are in some ways similar to what people experience when they meditate or, have other out-of-body experiences. So there's there's a relationship at least there, and then there's the whole UAP relationship where some of these things kind of morph into each other. Now, that doesn't mean that UAP are these things. It could be that these things are mimicking what UAP are. And they're like, they're just playing some kind
Or vice
of
versa,
game,
right? I
or
mean,
vice versa.
yeah,
Yeah. And so, my real question is not whether it is real or not. Let's assume that they're all real. What kind of universe would have to exist that encompasses all of those realities? What do you have to imagine is real for all of this stuff to potentially be true? And again, it's not saying, and I'm going to get probably, someone will misquote me, whatever. I'm not saying that it's true. It's
yeah,
just the mind game that a scientist like me at least likes to play is, okay, well, what could be the underlying structure that enables all of this to be possible? Because I spend more time in my head than I do in the real world, because that to me is more fun than dealing with frankly, in some cases, the boredom of reality. It doesn't mean I can't look out the window and think, oh, it's a beautiful day and it's raining. I love it. Um, I still like all of that, but I like to look at it and say, okay, well, that's part of the world, but there is a bigger reality just on the other side of it, behind the curtain. And that to me is, that's the awe uh, of nature. That's the awe, if you're religious, of contemplating God.
absolutely. And in some ways, I think those are related questions. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like this ontological rootedness that we're all trying to struggle
Hmm.
toward since we got disenchanted, as they say. Are you aware of any studies where people who are, and this is probably a stupid question because I mean, there's podcasters who fit this description, but systematically have looked at like experiencers who do things like, consciousness modalities, meditation, that sort of thing, and how that impacts their experience? Does it accelerate? Have you any idea of that? Or do they impact each other or?
I think they do. I think that there's a limit to what you can do with the material of your brain without some sort of adjunctive helper. I think you can train your thought processes. There are certainly people who are born with more ability than others, it seems. Um, I mean, look at Robert Monroe as an example of someone who whether he was born with it or not, he found a way to train himself and then to train many others how to do what he claims he can do, and that has helped people. So, you know, what was that old song? Language is a virus. Ideas are viruses, and that, uh, you know, people who do that claim interaction with things. Uh, I haven't done it. I've actually wanted to do the Robert Monroe training. I just haven't had the time to do so yet. Um, and I should do it. But I think that it's I think that people who do it need to try to formalize what it is that they think they're doing, and to the extent they can teach others, do so. And so I do think that you can enable yourself to a certain degree, but it just takes work,
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
Self-development, like everything good, right?
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
about an hour, but I wanted to ask you one last thing. Age of disclosure. You saw it this
Mhm.
past week.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it, and do you think it's going to be an effective vector for promulgating this awareness that maybe we're not alone in the universe?
Yeah, I think look, for anybody who is, who lives in the world of UAP information, there's probably not much in there. There were a few nuggets for me that are like, oh, I didn't know that. But what I saw, though, was first of all, an extraordinary, well-told story. Dan Farah did a remarkable job of weaving the story from A to Z, and used Lou Elizondo as the touch point throughout. But more so, and I was probably in there for like 30 to 45 seconds, making some comments about things. It was actually the juxtaposition of people like Senator Rubio and Senator Rounds, who were extensively quoted, that I'm proud to have whatever commentary I have bookended by those two notables. I mean,
Yeah,
so any of my colleagues who might end up on a Friday night sitting there watching TV with their family and suddenly, oh my God, it's Nolan again. Oh, look, wow. Senator Rubio has just said all this stuff about it. And wow, maybe Gary's right.
yeah.
You
There he
know,
goes again.
there you go. Yeah, it's like to me that made me proud
Yeah,
of the accomplishment of what he had done. I briefly got to meet Representative Burkett, um, uh, at the theater. He had to come and go, but that he came and spent some time on it, given all of the other things that he's involved with in government, was telling. That he took the time to come down, even though he was on stage for literally 10 minutes,
yeah, yeah,
been and gone.
yeah,
Um, and it was I think for people who are completely unknowledgeable about it, it's going to be remarkable. And you can see it from a lot of the reviews that were written by like People Magazine and Newsweek and the Hollywood Reporter, et cetera. I mean, these are people who don't know the area, and
yeah,
they were uniformly positive about it.
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's huge. I mean, anything that doesn't set off the history, like
History
History Channel
Channel vibe.
documentary
Yeah,
vibe, exactly right, is
yeah,
a major victory.
right,
So,
right. Yeah. So it'll be good. It's going to open it up for more people, and that's all you can really expect. I mean, absent uh, you know, the president coming out and saying they're here, and then so I'd like to invite my friend, from the Pleiades out on stage with me to make a comment, and they slither out on stage on their 10 tentacles. Absent that, very little is going to change the conversation, but um, you have to have fertile ground into which you cast such seed. And so this is preparing, I think, people for at least opening their mind as to the possibility.
yeah, exactly. It's starting the conversation for folks who never
Yeah.
really took it seriously. So, hopefully,
Yeah.
the public and I will get to see it
Oh, it'll
relatively
come out.
soon.
Yeah. I think he's just looking for a distributor now. So,
Makes sense. Well, thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate it. That was a fantastic conversation, a good hour. So,
yeah.
thank you. And I will.